Is it okay for Christians to read other religious holy books?
Where America is in Bible prophecy.
Women becoming pastors and
Anointing homes and praying over homes.
Why would God have people tormented and burned for eternity?
What happened or where Jesus went after he died?
What is your opinion of what the Bible says?
This is Pastor's Perspective. We're here every Monday through Friday providing answers on a variety of topics, including the Bible, end times, other religions, and the family. Call right now with your question at 1-888-564-6173. That's 888-564-6173. You can also post your question at facebook.com/Pastor's Perspective. Answering your questions today is the Senior Pastor of Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa, California, Brian Brodersen. Also on today's panel is author and apologist Don Stewart. And now, here's today's host, Brian Perez.
Welcome to today's program, and maybe I heard in the studio today. We have got a very special guest on Pastor's Perspective. He's written 17 books with an 18th book on the way. You've probably seen him on Fox News, CNN, the History Channel. That must have been quite a conversation. Our guest today, he's on Pastor's Perspective. It's Joel Rosenberg. Welcome, sir, to the program.
Great to be here.
Such
Even
an
as
honor to have
not
you.
as a pastor, but still great to be with you all. Thank you.
Great to have you here.
You know, Joel, you just said that, not as a pastor, and obviously you're not a pastor, but you're a great preacher. Yeah. And I was listening to you preach last night, and I was thinking, I don't know anybody that preaches any better than Joel does, especially on this topic. But really, seriously, God's really gifted you to preach, and it's great.
I appreciate that. Well, I have such a deep respect for men who have been called into the ministry specifically to be a pastor. I think it's a unique and specific calling. I do not have it. I'm not a shepherd. I'm a sheep. But I think that part of the body, we all have different gifts, and the question is how, in the area of eschatology, for one, a sound, healthy, not lunatics, not September 23rd is the end of the world or whatever. That seems to be a need among pastors who are struggling either to talk about it at all or talk about it in a balanced, healthy way. But also having a real heart and passion for Jewish and Muslim evangelism, having a heart not just for Israel, but Israel and her neighbors. That seems to be, again, value added into the body. And I'm thrilled that God took a joker like me and as a failed political consultant, because that's what I was, helping literally every single person I ever worked for lost. I'm not kidding, not one. In fact, I even got to know 14, I think, of the Republican presidential candidates in the last round. I'd never met Trump. I mean, I'm just saying that my friends think I should be working for the other team, whatever team they're on. I'm not even, so, hey, God can use anybody. So I'm honored to be with you guys.
Yeah, well, great. And again, thanks. I didn't really get to see you much last night after the service, but fantastic message.
Thank you. It was such a joy and honor to be here. And then, of course, the topic that we talked about me doing was, what in the world is going on. And front page of the USA Today yesterday was an article almost titled the exact same message. And with the first paragraph saying, with all these crazy things going on, hurricanes, earthquakes, shootings, nuclear showdowns, people are talking about the end times. Now, that's not Calvary Chapel. That's the USA Today. That's mainstream media going, what the heck?
Yeah, I reposted a tweet about a month ago, and it was actually a New York Times, an online article, and it was very similar to the USA Today title. It was like, and I think it was something like this. It was like, if you think this might be the end of the world, you might not be wrong.
Okay. Like, I want to get that article.
Okay, well, the New York Times posted an article that says that, they went through and they talked about all of these catastrophic things. And then, in the end, they sort of said, well, science tells us this, that, and the other thing. But, it was, I just thought it was an interesting
that's why I think it's so important to have this balanced, healthy, whole counsel of God type approach to Bible prophecy, because if we sound sensationalistic and you add it to the tensions and the fears that are out there, it looks odd and it looks like you're overreacting. We should be calm and loving and comforting in the Scriptures, warning, admittedly, but with comfort and love. If the mainstream media wants to worry about it, then we can respond, and we're now suddenly the the loving, rational, helpful, comforting people, and let the media hyperventilate.
Yeah. And as a pastor, I have always seen that end times prophecy in particular is always it's a bridge to people, because when stuff like, especially right now, when this kind of stuff is going on, these are the things that people wonder about. And then when they hear that, the Bible actually talks about this sort of stuff. I was flying back from Israel last year sometime, and I ended up sitting next to a Jewish guy. And no, actually, I was flying back from London. And he was flying from London, but he happened to be an Israeli who lives in London, has a business both in Israel and London, and so on. And, as we talked, we just started talking about the world. And I just started asking him, have you ever read Zechariah, the prophet? And he's like, I don't know if I have. And I said, well, you ought to read it. Yeah. Especially, chapter 12, 13, 14, because it's pretty much describing, I'm going to make Jerusalem a burdensome stone for all the nations, and all of the nations that come against her, I shall cut them to pieces. And, you'd think, well, look at what the prophet said, and look what's happening.
Yeah, I agree. I cited the great theologian A.W. Tozer last night, who said, a scared world needs a fearless church. I think it's such a great line. It's a real truth, and we don't want to do anything that stokes fear. Now, there is biblical warning, but see, it's not just content. Our content has to be healthy, but our tone has to be Christ-like. Yeah. And even if we have a hellfire and brimstone message, because that's what God said, you have to warn people that this is coming. How we say it is as important as getting it right what we say. This is, I think, a communicator's dream verse, John 12:49. I think of it from the NIV because it just seems to capture it so well. Jesus says, the Father commands me what to say and how to say it. Mm-hmm. Wow. And many people who teach prophecy, and even those who are doing it rightly in the sense of they're not biblically wrong and they're not crazy, but they're so focused on getting that content out, the what to say, they're not thinking necessarily carefully and perhaps even wisely about how to say it. They're either so excited about it, or they're so scared of it, or they're so intellectual about it. They're not thinking, Holy Spirit, how am I supposed to communicate this? And Jesus said, I make, the Father commanded me. And I say to the Lord every time I get up, Lord, don't make me guess. I'm not saying I get it always right. I'm not always hearing the Spirit, correctly or obeying properly. But that verse, the Father commands me what to say and how to say it, I think should guide all of us as biblical communicators, and especially in the area of prophecy.
Yeah, how to say it is so important. And, I think of the passage in Galatians 6, and the context is different, but the principle, I think, is the same. If anyone sees a brother overtaken in a fault, you who are spiritual, go to that person in a spirit of humility or meekness. And that's and even, Peter, when he talks about apologetics, remember, he says, sanctify the Lord in your heart, be ready always to give every man an answer for the reason, for the hope that is in you, with meekness and reverence. It's like sometimes we cut that part of the verse off. We forget the meekness and the reverence part.
That is, especially if you have a television show, it seems to not fit the medium. But okay, so
but it's great when you because when this is the problem with some end time stuff, right? It is the sensationalizing of things. It's like, this is sensational enough. We really don't need to try to add anything to it. I mean, this stuff it's built in.
Absolutely, and when you have a healthy, normal, sound, whole counsel of God type approach, people will ask you. If you had somebody ask you on a plane, like I'm astonished. I travel all over the world. I meet Muslim leaders. I meet Jewish leaders. I meet atheists, and if you just sit and have a conversation, they want this. They can see what's happening in the world, and they can't explain it. I've had meetings with former senior intelligence officials. That's their job to understand the world. And they're going, so what's your take?
Yeah.
What does the Bible say? Because I honestly cannot figure this out right now. And they were not going to have that conversation, a sort of a Nicodemus with Jesus.
Yeah.
Can we just have a quiet conversation, just the two of us, unless they think that you are a follower of Jesus, that you've been with Jesus, and that you're going to be loving and compassionate in the conversation and protective of their questions and concerns, and with discretion.
Yeah. So yesterday we were talking about this, and I think Don and I were maybe talking about it without you in the room, Joel. We were talking about your, sort of your genre of your novels. And, you have things like historical fiction, so it's there's history in it for sure, but then there's these fictional characters woven in. So we're trying to identify your genre as, so is it like prophetic fiction or so? But here's the thing that I said, and this is what I want to talk about for a minute. So I know this is true. Some of the contacts and conversations that you have ended up having with world leaders are the result of somebody reading your book and reading it like, this is so close to exactly what the case is. We got to talk to this guy and find out, how does he know this? And who's telling him this stuff? Some of that's happening, right?
That is happening, yeah. And so I shy away. I don't accept the idea that it's prophetic fiction. A lot of people will, believers will say that.
I said that tongue in cheek.
No, I know, but I get it all the time. Oh, you're a prophet, and I say no. I run a nonprofit. But I mean, the books admittedly are profit, but I mean, the Joshua Fund is not. But the reason I push back at it, for those who are not saying it tongue in cheek, is for this reason. Sometimes I do weave biblical prophecies into the books as how might this play out if it were to happen in our lifetime. I don't do that in every book. I do that in some of the books. Some books I do it more than others. But the reason, what I'm trying to say is I'm not trying to be predictive of what will happen. Mm-hmm. My intent is to write worst case scenarios about what could happen. Some of those are the jumping off point are prophecies that we do know will happen, but I don't know how they're going to play out exactly. Mm-hmm. I don't know when they're going to play out exactly. And so I'm not trying to say this will happen. For example, first novel that I wrote in January 2001, right? The Last Jihad. The first page puts you inside the cockpit of a jet plane hijacked by radical Islamic terrorists coming in on a kamikaze attack mission into an American city. Now, if I was being prophetic, the book would have come out a year before. I was writing it before, but it came out the year after. How is that helpful to anyone? Now, admittedly, the book leads from the kamikaze attack on the United States to an American president declaring war on Saddam Hussein and removing him from power. That could have seemed prophetic. It wasn't. It was predictive. It wasn't predictive. It was, if this ever happened, part A, if radical Muslims hijacked plane and flew it into America, what might happen then? The fact that I got the premise so chillingly accurate was a surprise to myself. There's nothing in the Bible that said planes are going to go fly into buildings. It just didn't happen. And I picked Denver, not New York, not Washington. It was a Gulfstream 4 private jet, not commercial. My point is this. Because I happen to, admittedly, a book like the Ezekiel Option that plays out a scenario in which Russia, Iran, Turkey form an alliance with some other countries and come and attack Israel in the last days, what we all know as the War of Gog and Magog, that will happen. There are 2 full chapters in Ezekiel about it. But it doesn't really tell us how, and it doesn't really exactly tell us when, except that it's going to happen in the last days after Israel's been regathered. So the rest is fiction. Like, maybe, what if it happened this way? And I think that's the important thing. But you're right. The fact that the books feel realistic and they feel like they're playing out, that they're war games, that they're worst case scenarios that really, wow, that really could happen. That is what's drawing intelligence chiefs and generals and admittedly a king to say, I want to read. Like, I have other things to do in my life, but I will read Joel's fiction because, for crying out loud, that's just crazy, weird, but compelling. So maybe we invite him in and sit down and say, who are you exactly? What is going on in there? Because this is not normal.
Okay, I'm going to go out on a limb and ask you. I mean, you can just say, no, we can't do that. But, so you and I were together a while back, and we were having dinner in Jerusalem, and you and Lynn and Cheryl and I, and, you told us a story about how you ended up meeting this particular world leader. And it was a connection through a guy who happened to pick up your book in a London airport bookstore.
Yes.
Can you kind of walk us through that without,
No, I can. That's an open secret.
Because this is so fascinating. And, when Joel told us, it still was kind of under the radar. So, we took an oath, that he could.
Well, it's nice that you kept it. I appreciate it. So, okay, we can let that out now. So, in January of 2016, just a year and a half ago or so, an advisor to King Abdullah II of Jordan was flying through London to meet His Majesty in Washington. The king was going to meet with the President Obama at that time, and with congressional leaders and, the Secretary of Defense and so forth. This advisor, for other reasons, had to route through London, and then he was just going to meet the king. He picks up a copy of The First Hostage, one of my novels, in Heathrow Airport. He has no idea who I am. The title looks interesting. He hadn't, he just grabbed it, got on his plane, and started reading. What he didn't expect was that this novel, which was the second in a series, was about King Abdullah of Jordan. I named him the king as a character. Like now that's risky, right? Yeah. I'm Jewish. I'm an evangelical. I'm a Zionist. I'm a dual U.S.-Israeli citizen. To name a descendant of Muhammad, who's an actual living monarch of a Muslim Arab country who happens to be our neighbor, in a novel where the plot is that ISIS is trying to overthrow him personally, and assassinate him and take over his kingdom, that's risky.
That is risky.
Okay. Now, I didn't, so he found it fair. So this advisor, I don't want to characterize it more than he found it interesting. So when he landed, he went to the king and he said, "You have to read this."
Wow.
And the king said, "Why?" He said, "Because you're in it." And he looks at it and he said, "What are you talking about? It's a novel." "I know, but you're a character. You're a named character in this book." And I'm just saying, you will want to find out what happens to you. And the kingdom. So, as it happens, if any of your listeners have a direct way for me to send a thank you note to President Obama, I still owe him one 18, 19 months in, because President Obama canceled his meeting with the King of Jordan on that trip. It was too busy, too much going on. I'm sorry, I cannot see our main, most faithful Sunni Arab ally fighting ISIS in a hot war that we have encouraged. So I can't explain that. I think that was insane. But it did create 2 days on the king's schedule that were unscheduled because all the prepping for the meeting, the having the meeting, the debriefing from the meeting before you have the congressional meeting and so forth. There was nothing to do. So as it turns out, in 2 days, the king read The First Hostage.
Wow.
Now, I will tell you, guys, that I had actually been trying to get the novel to him. I thought I knew some people that might be able to, and even the one before it, which is the third target, was never successful. Praying for a door, never happened. But after that, the king, who, at that point, right, Don, yeah, I'm just looking at you. You could just ban me from the kingdom forever.
Exactly.
You write a novel about me. ISIS is trying to kill me and overthrow my kingdom. Adios, muchachos. I don't know how to say that in Arabic, but, never come back. but rather the next thing I know, we're getting invited, Lynn and myself, to come and visit the kingdom for 5 days to meet with the king and his advisors and his generals. It was never said explicitly, but the way we read it was to show us what they're trying to do to make sure that my novels never come true. Wow. It was the most fascinating 5 days. Wow. I mean, to have lunch with a king. By the way, so we had lunch. It was the king, the advisor that had given him the book, Lynn and myself, just the four of us in the situation room. Mm-hmm. And the king said to us, I was trying to figure out where to meet you first, and I thought, well, why not just have you come to the palace that you destroyed in the book? So we laughed, and then he said he said that he actually buys copies of the book, and because he can see the fictional characters that I had built around him as aides and advisors. And he says he knows, of course, which person on his team actually is that person. Yep. And he'll give him the book and point, says, that's you. You don't make it. Through the terrorist attack. So he's got a good sense of humor about it. But then there was one other thing. So I said, this is actually the second book in a series, right? The first novel is The Third Target. And he said, I know, I just didn't have it. I said, well, I brought you some copies for you and your team. And I just have to show you, Your Majesty. So I opened up the book. I said, can I just show you the first sentence on the first page of the first book in the series? He said, sure. So we flip it open. It says, I had never met a king before. That's how the series opens. So without missing a beat, he pulls out a pen and he writes, well, you have now, and he signs his name and he hands it back.
Wow. Wow.
Whoa. We had such a special time over those days, and I was impressed with him going in. I was even more impressed going out.
In case you've just joined us, you're listening to Pastor's Perspective. I'm Brian Perez with Brian Brodersen and Don Stewart and our very special guest, Joel Rosenberg of the Joshua Fund, and also the speaker at the Epicenter Conference, which is happening this weekend at Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa. Tickets are still available Friday night and all day Saturday. You can get the details at epicenterconference.com. epicenterconference.com. Joel, why is it called the Epicenter Conference? What does that mean?
Well, Epicenter is the name that I gave to Israel and her immediate surrounding neighbors. I did so in my first ever nonfiction book, which I wrote in 2005 and early 2006, and actually released the book at the request of Pastor Chuck in September of 2006. This was the first place I spoke. This is where we released the book. And but the reason I use the term Epicenter, by the way, was not only the title of the book, it became a documentary film that Pastor Chuck, Skip Heitzig, and I produced together and released the following year. And then we did a conference in Jerusalem called Epicenter, and now this one is the 9th conference. So the term, of course, is a geological term. Oxford Dictionary defines it as the point on the earth above which is the beginning point of an earthquake. Okay, right? It's the point from which all the energy of the shaking radiates out of. Right. Obviously, it really technically happens underground, but this is the point on the earth so that you can see.
We know all about epicenters
here
in California.
Sorry. So you're asking why would you apply that to Israel? Okay. Yeah. And the reason is biblical. Ezekiel 5, verse 5. God says, I have set Jerusalem at the center of the nation with all the lands around her. Skip forward to Ezekiel 38. I believe it's verse 7. Anyway, it's in chapter 38. And it says, I'm going to bring the Jewish people back to the land of Israel at the center of the nations. The Hebrew word center there, that's translated center, actually means navel or belly button. This is the middle. So from God's perspective, geographically, Israel, and specifically Jerusalem, is the exact center of his plan and purpose for all the nations. That's how he sees it. Jerusalem's the center, everyone else is around them. Okay? Now, you skip forward to the New Testament, Acts chapter 1, Jesus says, in Jerusalem, you will be my witnesses, and the Spirit will come upon you with power, and you'll be my witnesses in Jerusalem Judea, Samaria, and to the very ends of the earth. So spiritually, from the perspective of the gospel, from the perspective of the church, it all starts in Jerusalem and it radiates outward. And here today, skip forward one more time to Revelation. The last city ever mentioned in the Bible is Jerusalem. Okay? So you see this pattern where Jerusalem is the center of God's plan and purpose. Israel is the center, and the neighbors around her are part of that plan and purpose. And, we live in an age where Israel was not a sovereign country for most of the last, 2,000 years. Actually, it was never, for 2,000 years, because it predates Jesus, they were still under Roman occupation. But now, next year will be the 70th anniversary of the prophetic rebirth of the state of Israel, which God said would happen. Now it's happened. Jews are coming back to the land. Russia, Turkey, and Iran are forming an alliance at this moment. And so the eyes of the nations are fixed on Israel, on Jerusalem, the epicenter of the momentous events that are shaking our world and shaping our future. And amazing. A conference like this allows us to begin to educate the North American church and the church more broadly. Okay, I got that, but where does this all go, and how do I, as a believer, what role should I be playing? Okay, pray for the peace of Jerusalem, but how else can I be helpful?
Yeah. Epicenterconference.com is where to get more information about the conference, which again is happening tomorrow night and all day Saturday here in Southern California at Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa. Epicenterconference.com.
Yeah, and Joel, we're going to go to a break here in a second, so we need to just probably pause a little bit and we'll go into it in the second half. But I wanted to talk a little bit about the emphasis of this conference, because it's a bit different than any of the previous Epicenter conferences you've done. So last night, the message last night was very similar to what you would expect at an Epicenter conference in the past, but this weekend the emphasis is different, and I think it'd be great if we could explain it. And I think because somebody was asking me last night, how do you think we should, present this? And I just thought, this is you're going to tell the story with the actors themselves there telling the story of what God is doing in the land today among Arabs, Jews, Muslims, and how Christ is at work in the midst of those groups. Does that kind of summarize what we're talking about?
Absolutely. In previous conferences, we have looked at the geopolitics of the region. In Philadelphia a few years ago, we had the Vice Prime Minister of Israel come and give us the keynote. But we are not doing that this time. We've done it in the past. What we're doing now is saying, you hear so much bad news. Is the Holy Spirit moving? Mm-hmm. Right? We know that Jews will come to Christ, and some are. Are Palestinians coming to Christ? Is anybody else in the region coming to Christ? And how do we, as the church on the outside, how do we help our brothers and sisters make sure that every Jew and Muslim hears the gospel, at least hears it and understands it and can make a decision? That, I think, is ultimately the most important issues in the Epicenter. That's what we'll focus on this weekend.
Epicenterconference.com, once again, is the website. I can't say it enough. I want you guys to get your tickets. Epicenterconference.com. It's tomorrow night, Friday night, and Saturday. I believe it also includes lunch is included in the price of the ticket. So Epicenterconference.com. It's happening at Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa, here in Southern California in Orange County. If you live within driving distance, you should definitely get out here Friday night and Saturday. Who are the different speakers who are going to be at the conference?
Right. They won't be names that you know, but they are names that are very near and dear to God's heart. So you'll have 3 Israeli Jewish pastors and 3 Arab Palestinian pastors. These are men that are on the ground, front lines. One runs the main Bible college in the country.
Yeah.
One is the chairman of all the Palestinian churches. It'll be fascinating.
We'll be right back.
Guys.
Pastor's Perspective continues in just a moment. Stay with us. Welcome back. Pastor's Perspective continues with your question to 1-888-564-6173. And now here again is your host, Brian Perez.
All right, welcome back to the program. I am Brian Perez here with Brian Brodersen of Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa, and Don Stewart of educatingourworld.com, and our very special guest, author and speaker Joel Rosenberg, whom you can see, is it who you can see or whom you can see? Both. One of those, at the Epicenter Conference happening this weekend at Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa. Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa tickets are still available for purchase at epicenterconference.com. And you actually can do a walk-on registration. So if for whatever reason you're not able to get online to register, then just come out Friday evening, probably around 6 o'clock, be a perfect time to show up, and you can register then. You can also register on Saturday. So we'll have registration booths there available for you both Friday and Saturday. Will there be enough food to go around? Well, we'll give them half of our Chick-fil-A, I mean, because we're Christians, right?
That's
so if
right.
people come and they don't have lunch,
there could be 12 baskets full left over. We'll see how things go.
That's true.
But
so I want to chime in, Joel, to what we were talking about, because we're explaining kind of what the focus of this conference is going to be, and I just want to say this. So yesterday I had an opportunity to sit around a table with the guys that are going to be sharing at the conference, the three Arab-Palestinian pastors and the three Jewish pastors. And the stories that I was able to hear in just a brief amount of time were so riveting and so powerful. Man, I'll tell you, that in and of itself is worth the price of admission. You want to come. I had coffee with my son this morning, and we were just talking about, prophecy and things like that. And, last Sunday morning I preached on Acts 2, and in the last days I will pour out my spirit on all flesh, says the Lord. Your sons and daughters shall prophesy, your young men shall see visions, your old men shall dream dreams. I was talking about, look, our faith is supernatural. God, there's prophecy and visions and dreams. So we were talking about that, and I said, let me tell you about the visions that I heard about yesterday and the dreams, that these Muslim people are having in the land of Israel. And so, I mean, those stories are so powerful. They're so riveting. So, among other things, all of it is obviously a faith builder, but it's a faith builder to just hear the stories of how God is working, and he's working in the land. And Joel, one of the things that I thought was so interesting was one of the pastors was talking about, he's from Bethlehem. He lives in Bethlehem. He pastors in Bethlehem, and he's talking about the city of Hebron. And the city of Hebron is predominantly Muslim.
No, 100% Muslim.
Okay, 100%.
Muslim,
okay,
yes.
I thought he said it was 99. So it's 100%. Wow,
no, there's an enclave called Kiryat Arba. That's the hyper-religious Jewish, settlement, but it's yeah.
Okay. So, but the thing that cracked me up, he said, so whenever something's happening in Hebron with these Muslims or having dreams or something, they come to Bethlehem because, that's the place to go because that's where Jesus was born, right? So we're going to go find out. We had in a dream, like we saw Jesus, so we're going to go find out.
I like to say anybody that's trying to find Jesus, if they're a wise man, they should go to Bethlehem, right? I mean, it's pretty standard there.
Yeah.
But still true today.
Yeah, but I'm telling you, these stories are so you don't want to miss it. And I only heard little bits and pieces, so just absolutely fascinating stuff. So it's going to be great.
I think these are stories that people aren't going to normally hear. You're not going to hear it on CNN, and you're not even going to hear it on Fox. I mean, whichever side you're on, or MSNBC, you're just not going to hear this, right? Because if you're trying to make a peace deal and you're a prime minister, a president, a foreign minister, a secretary of state, you will get plenty of airtime to talk about how you're going to try to make peace, and you never do. But these are men these are peacemakers. These are men who have found the Prince of Peace. God has completely transformed their lives. They love each other, even despite all the tensions between Israelis and Palestinians. And, it's hard. It's expensive for people to get on a plane and go all the way around the world and come visit Israel. And even when they do, what's the chance that they're going to know who to go to talk to find a Palestinian pastor or an Israeli pastor? So that's what we want to bring them here and let you hear them yourself.
Yeah. Great. So good news. Here's the good news. Food will be available for everyone. All
The
right.
word came down from the top from our manager, Lance, Emma. He guarantees.
I thought from Horeb, but okay, from Lance is good too.
Yeah, Lance. Well, it's relatively the same thing. So, okay, here's what we're going to do now. Surprise. Here's what we're going to do. We have two experts sitting right here in the room with us, Brian.
Yes.
On Bible prophecy, Middle East stuff. Don has been studying, writing, teaching, preaching on many topics, obviously, but this is something that's been near and dear to his heart forever. And Joel, you're sitting here, so I am going to back away from the mic, and Brian's going to back away from the mic, and we're going to let you two guys talk about just some stuff that you feel is really, pertinent stuff to talk about right now. Now, I heard this earlier today, but I was trying. I wasn't ignoring you, Joel, when you were. I was trying to find on Twitter if I could find a news flash on it. But I heard today that President Trump is rolling back the Iran deal.
He's going to decertify it.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So, take it away, experts.
The footnote of caution.
Yeah.
I need to hear him give a speech and explain what does he mean by decertify. We know that the Secretary of Defense and the Secretary of State oppose decertification. And we know that UN Ambassador Nikki Haley very much strongly supports decertification. And the question is, A, if it's not fake news, first. Yeah. B, if he's really decertifying, then C, what does the president mean by decertification? Because that might not mean he's going to scrap the Iran deal. Let's go back to the presidential campaign for a moment, even the primaries. Then candidate Donald Trump, he never, to my recollection, ever promised to rip up the deal. Right? Ted Cruz offered, wanted to do that. Rubio, pretty much everybody said that's an insane deal where we give $100 billion to our worst enemy. They don't even sign the paper. There's literally not a signed piece of paper that they have to do anything. But all they have to do is not build a nuclear weapon for 10 to 15 years, and then they'll have all restrictions removed, and we'll give them $100 billion up front, and we'll remove all economic sanctions up front. And then hopefully they'll keep their end of the deal, even though we won't make them sign. Okay, that's insane. I'm sorry. I don't mean to be partisan, but I'm just saying that is an insane deal. We tried it in 1994. President Bill Clinton did the exact same deal, effectively, with North Korea, although he only gave him $4 billion. President Obama gave $100 billion. But what did we get? 6 nuclear weapon tests from North Korea and 14 ballistic missile tests this year alone.
Yeah.
Okay, problem, doesn't work. So, I support scrapping the deal, but I understand that it's complicated because a bunch of other countries in the world, it wasn't just the United States that made this deal. It was the P5+1. It's the entire leadership of the free world. So now it's possible to decertify without scrapping the deal, meaning that you would say that Iran is not in compliance, and therefore the president would have to lay out what's the proof of that, what would you have to do to get back in compliance, and how long do you have to do it, and what are the consequences if you don't, right? So that's what I need. That's what I need to hear. But I will say, if we're scanning headlines, so we talked for a moment ago before the break about the war of Gog and Magog. Now, I'm not saying, let's just be clear, I'm not saying that we're there yet. This biblical moment, Ezekiel 38 and 39, where Russia, Iran, and Turkey form an alliance, and then with another group of countries and come and attack a prophetically reborn Israel. Not saying we're there yet, but there's a great Hebrew word, aval, and it means however or but. Aval. Just consider this headline, okay? And this is not from, Calvary Chapel News. It's not from K-Wave. This is from an Arab satellite television network, Al Arabiya, right? Quote, this is the headline that's in front of me. Putin, the dictator of Russia, Putin in Ankara, that's the capital of Turkey, Putin in Ankara to forge alliance of Russia, Turkey, and Iran last Thursday. Now, I make things up for a living, Don.
Yep.
That's what I do.
Yeah.
I'm a fiction writer. I make things up. I did not make that up.
Nope.
Something interesting is happening. And I think this president does understand how dangerous a threat Iran is, and they are not going to be compliant with this thing. He's got a battle within his own administration. At some point, however, Russia and Iran are going to be the worst threat to Israel and our allies and to us imaginable. We're not quite there yet, but so those are my first reaction to that headline.
Yeah, what it looks like, Joel, he's going to send it back to Congress for the 60-day review. In other words, he's going to say they're non-compliant, so Congress, they'll kick the can down to them. Okay, so 60 days, because remember, it's not a treaty. There was nothing signed.
Right.
And so I think what he's going to do is put the ball in Congress's lap and see what they say. So it's going to be interesting if that's the case.
It is. Now, look, I don't want to be political, but when you mention the word president and Trump, you've already dived into a difficult thing. So because some of your listeners are going, I just can't even hear the guy's name. Others are like, hey, what's the problem? The guy is fantastic. And others like, look, I voted for him, but could he stop tweeting? There's a big range. Okay. Now you have to understand that I was a never Trumper until Thursday before the election. Okay, you just have to understand that I was not comfortable.
I can affirm that.
Yeah, okay. I can too.
I follow you.
Yes,
and
we all.
I read all of the reasons that you had written over that long period of time of why this could not happen.
And I concluded on the Thursday before that of the two bad choices that I had, bad in the sense I didn't feel comfortable with either, one was worse than the other. And so I did vote for for candidate Trump. There were some reasons. I'm not going to unpack them now, but I want to say this. I was on CNN a couple months after that. I was on Anderson Cooper, and there was a lot of criticism of the president at the time, and he was challenging me, Anderson was, and I said, listen, okay, here's the thing. I'm an evangelical, right? So as an evangelical, I think of this as a little bit like a marriage. I did not think that the country should marry this particular, suitor, let's just say, okay? I was not comfortable with that marriage. In the end, I prefer that marriage than to Hillary, but I wasn't comfortable, and I just needed to be honest about that, and with your listeners too. But the reason I said it was because I said to Anderson Cooper, this marriage has happened. This is the President of the United States, and we are only, at that moment, we were 2 months in. Okay, now we are 9 months in. We've got a long slog, and this is our commander-in-chief. For all the flaws, A, we need to be praying for him. B, even though some evangelicals wouldn't get within 10,000 miles of even shaking his hand or meeting him, some evangelical leaders have said, if I can spend some time and try to speak into his life, try to provide some counsel, I will try. My point is there's a range of reactions, but we have existential threats building from North Korea, from Iran, from Russia. You've got major global economic issues. We cannot afford just to say, well, that guy's an idiot. It's all Twitter, and he's a moron, and I'm gonna. So I just think as believers, we can be critical, but we cannot be cynical. This is the man who constitutionally has the right to make decisions about war and peace, and we need to pray that the Lord gives him good counselors. Vice President Pence, I think, is one of them, and I think the others are. He's got a great national security team. I would choose this team any day of the week and twice on Sunday. Will he listen? He's a novice, admittedly. He knows it. So I just think we've got to walk carefully in the fact that of prayerful and respect for the office, and the fact that he's the one that's going to decide.
Okay, question closer to home. Today, ISIS has doubled down, saying the shooter in Las Vegas was a convert 6 months ago. And they are not known for making this sort of stuff up. Now, they exaggerate, but as far as I know, there haven't been a lot of claims they've made about events where they weren't, participating. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I'm an agnostic on that so far because I haven't seen any data, and I tend not to take ISIS at face value, obviously. However, I agree. The experts that I'm paying attention to say it's pretty rare for the Islamic State leadership to go on a limb because they tend to come out with proof soon, like a video, something that's the guy's declared. So we'll see.
Right.
I'll tell you, it It feels like an ISIS attack. It does not feel like, some guy. Now, I don't know how to read the credibility of the girlfriend or the brother, right? But they are saying, we didn't see it coming. I don't know. This was a lot of planning.
Yes.
It's a lot of carnage, the worst in American history. And if it's domestic terror, it's domestic terror. Timothy McVeigh was a homegrown lunatic mass murderer, and he didn't have any ties to radical Islam. Okay, so he blows up the FBI building in Oklahoma. A lot of people dead. So we grow our own homegrown lunatic mass murderers, but I am open to the possibility that we're going to see proof that he actually had help.
Yeah, okay. Like you said, Joel, Tehran is almost building a land bridge, aren't they, from Tehran all the way either to Beirut or Damascus there. And they're right on Israel's northern border. You've got, also Turkey now, like you said, Russia involved there, Russian soldiers and civvies, sometimes wearing their, outfit, a couple kilometers from, Golan Heights. This solves
astonishing.
It is. But doesn't this solve something we've been wondering for years? How in the world could Israel be attacked feeling in safety if they have to come so far away, particularly with satellite technology? They're going to be on their doorstep. They're not going to leave. Yeah. They're going to be there for, it could be many years, but it sets the stage in a remarkable way, because if we would have said this in 73 when Iran was Israel's best friend, or said it a few years ago when Turkey, the Israelis took their vacations in Turkey, you think we're nuts. But
myself included, yes.
Yeah, Bible's proved to be true again, huh?
Yeah. So of course, referring to Ezekiel 38 and 39, the war of Gog and Magog, and thinking, okay, so if Russia really is Magog, and I believe it is, I think the data is solid, and Persia clearly is Iran, if Gomer historically really is Turkey, there are other countries, but starting with those, suddenly they're all fighting on the same side in Syria, just north of the mountains of Israel.
Exactly.
Okay, so you're right. Suddenly, Russia's building a military base. They are building a naval port. They have a foothold in the Middle East, which was bedrock American foreign policy, never to let the Russians have a toehold, much less a foothold, much less the whole body in the Middle East. And now they're there. Okay, so that's a problem. And it doesn't tell us that the war of Gog and Magog is imminent, but it is so consistent with the prophecy that you have to say, wow, okay, it's not conclusive, but it's curious. Now add to that, one of the things that's interesting about the Gog and Magog prophecies in Ezekiel, there's another war of Gog and Magog in Revelation that's a different war. One of the things that's interesting is that Lebanon and Syria are not mentioned.
Correct.
And, okay, so when my book Epicenter released here at Calvary Costa Mesa with Pastor Chuck in the fall of 2006, a big part of that book is not just about the Middle East generally, but about Gog and Magog, because that fascinates me. So people were asking me then, 11 years ago, they asked me today, well, how come Lebanon and Syria are not mentioned? Because it's clear that the bulk of the Russian and coalition forces, while they do surround Israel, they're coming from the north. It says they come against the mountains of Israel. So they're clearly ground troops, right? But Lebanon and Syria are not mentioned. Now, you can't come against the mountains of Israel in the north unless you come through Lebanon and Syria. So how come they're not mentioned? And that was a tough one to answer. Sure. And I said at the time, maybe it's because they're unwilling players. They're being overrun, but they're not trying to be against. Now, here's a new theory. Okay, I think that's still consistent, but Syria does not exist anymore.
No, it does not.
There essentially is no sovereignty to the government of Bashar al-Assad. He controls very little territory. Who controls the territory of Syria? That would be a coalition of Russia, Russia, Iran, and Turkey, the very countries that God says. So maybe Syria, obviously the land exists, the people exist, but maybe it was not mentioned because it isn't Syria anymore. It's essentially a province of Russia and Iran, and to a degree Turkey. Now you take Lebanon. Now Lebanon's not at war at the moment, but Lebanon is. It's tough to make the case that Lebanon is a sovereign country. Also, it is effectively controlled by Hezbollah, which is a wholly owned subsidiary terrorist organization, Shia apocalyptic Islamic terror organization run by, funded by, armed by, trained by, directed by Iran. So the two countries that are through which the Gog and Magog forces will come are now effectively controlled by Russia and Iran.
Exactly.
Which could explain why these two names are not mentioned, even though the forces come through there. Again, I am not drawing a conclusion. People ask me, is Vladimir Putin Gog? I said, it's too early to say, but he's Gog-esque.
Sure
I will
Gog-esque.
grant you that.
Yep. Also, we're 5 minutes left. Couple other questions. What's interesting, though, neither is Jordan or Egypt mentioned either, and for different reasons. But they're, Egypt, of course, is going to be revival there. Isaiah tells us that in the last days. And Jordan, interesting, sits right next to those countries, but they're not involved in the war either.
That's exactly right. And what's interesting is since 1979, we have had, because of the Camp David Accords, we have had the first ever peace treaty between Israel and Egypt ever. I mean, you have to go back. Egypt has always been the main enemy of Israel, going back to Charlton Heston taking on Yul Brynner, right? I mean, we just know that that's the case. Jordan signed a peace treaty with Israel in 1994. Now, one other thing, Don, on that, and I know we're landing the plane here.
Yep.
So all right. So this is just my personal vantage point to sit as a Jewish evangelical Israeli citizen, to sit in the palace in Amman with a Muslim king who has a peace treaty with Israel, who has no problem with me coming and with me being public about it, that's not normal in all of human history, right? Then, so in April, I get invited to meet with Egyptian President El-Sisi in Washington. Now, not just me, there was 60 Middle East experts and Jewish leaders. I got invited. I got a chance to go up and chat with him for a little while afterwards. Very quickly, I commended him on his fight against radical Islam, his alliance, or at least his treaty with Israel, and I commended him that he is reaching out consistently to Jewish leaders, Coptic Egyptian Christian leaders, and Catholic leaders. I noted to him that I do not see him that he's reached out to evangelical leaders. Now, I didn't criticize him. I said, we probably just haven't asked. He said, well, would you bring a delegation of Christian leaders? I would be honored to, and we are doing that next month. Now, I say that to end this. I flew back from that meeting with the president of Egypt to Israel for Passover, and I said to my friends over Passover, for a Jew to meet the leader of Egypt on the eve of Passover and say, let my people come, and for him to say yes, that is not normal. We are in different times. And there's something positive happening, even as all this threat is building. But the key I bring back to, as exciting as it was to spend time with a king or president, spending time with these pastors, I am more excited about, because these are men who will sit in the kingdom. These are ambassadors of Jesus, the king who is coming. And while I love those others and will do everything I can to be a blessing to my neighbors, wow, I get excited spending time with Israeli and Palestinian followers of Jesus Christ, especially when they are preaching the gospel with great courage.
Fantastic.
What a program. You've been listening to Pastor's Perspective. I'm Brian Perez, in studio with Brian Brodersen of Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa, and Don Stewart of EducatingOurWorld.com, and our very special guest today, Joel Rosenberg. I know we're going to get phone calls about this. How can I hear this program again? We will be posting the podcast in the next couple of hours at the website of our flagship radio station, KWVE-FM. Go there and click programs and podcasts, and you'll be able to see or listen to the program. You can also hear it again in a few hours on the Pastor's Perspective YouTube channel. The Epicenter Conference happening this weekend, Friday night and all day Saturday at Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa. Tickets are still available at epicenterconference.com. The tickets will include lunch on Saturday. As we mentioned earlier, you can also purchase your tickets on site at Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa on Friday night or Saturday morning. But do come out if you can. It's going to be, I mean, if you thought the past hour was fascinating, you can imagine what a full day conference is going to be like with Joel Rosenberg and his guests this Friday night and all day Saturday at Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa. For more details, epicenterconference.com. Joel is also the founder and chairman of the Joshua Fund. In 20 seconds, what is the Joshua Fund?
We mobilize Christians to bless Israel and her neighbors in the name of Jesus, according to the Abrahamic covenant, Genesis 12, 1 through 3. We educate people about God's love for these Israel and the neighbors, and we encourage and strengthen the church to fulfill the Great Commission in our generation, hopefully.
Awesome.
In those places.
Joel Rosenberg, thanks for being on the program
such an honor.
today.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it very much.
All right. You've been listening to Pastor's Perspective. Like I said, just a couple of hours, we'll put the podcast up on the website of our flagship radio station, KWVE.com. I'm Brian Perez for Brian Brodersen and Don Stewart and our guest, Joel Rosenberg. Thanks for listening. God bless you. Have a great evening. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to Pastor's Perspective. We trust you've been blessed and had your question answered. Join us Monday through Friday and follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/pastorsperspective. The preceding was sponsored by Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa, California.